Thanks for joining us again for the Beyond Data podcast. We are here today with Alexander Visheratin. He is an NLP expert working for a company named Beehive. And we're excited to talk to him today about some, interesting elements of NLP and deployment of those models and really get into it. Alexander, it's really great to have you here today. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of who you are and where you come from?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. My name is Alex, and I work as an AI engineer in Beehive AI. So in Beehive AI, we work on processing large surveys for different companies, and we specialize on open-ended data. So this is where my expertise comes from. So I have plenty of experience of working with different kinds of NLP models, and generally deep learning models, algorithms, and the ways how to deploy them efficiently is something I'm very interested about.
Great. Well, there's a lot of hype right now about NLP with the new ChatGPT model coming out.
Yeah.
I've heard all kinds of different things about it and kind of even played with it a little bit. It's kind of crazy and interesting. And what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So interesting thing about ChatGPT is basically everything you hear about it is right. So when you hear that it is changing the world, it will replace Google, and it will just change the way we interact with the knowledge. To some extent, in some cases, that's true. Because, for example, if we are talking about some common knowledge that exists for ages by now, this model can do very well with this kind of data, because it is sort of static knowledge, and these models are very good at capturing like static knowledge and being able to reason about it and like think through and sort of think through. But basically, it by the way how it was trained, it was stuck in around like 2020 or 2021 in terms of knowledge. For example, I didn't ask this specific question ChatGPT, but I asked different large language model, who is the president of the United States, and it very confidently answered Barack Obama. So it is like not entirely true.
Not exactly, yes.
Yeah.
Well, bringing up the whole confident thing is interesting, because that's one of the things I've been thinking about is like, I think just as humans, we tend to trust machines, especially if they sound intelligent and confident. And then
that
just
applies to humans. If you sound confident, people trust you. It's the way con men get away with things.
Yeah.
That is a human issue, irrespective of who's talking.
That's true.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, and this is another, like, we talked a bit about good things, and now going to bad things. So ChatGPT is very confident in whatever it says. So, for example, I saw a tweet from Andrew Ng, who is co-founder of Coursera and very well-known researcher. So he asked ChatGPT to prove that CPU is better than GPU for deep learning. And it was very confident, and it created like long paragraph of text proving it. Then he asked it to prove that some like more primitive way of calculating is better than CPU. And it again provided very confident paragraph of text proving this. And then he ended up basically proving that Abacus is better than GPU for deep learning.
Wow.
And ChatGPT was very confident in all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then the age of misinformation, that's just scary, right? Like being able to.
Why OpenStack have had to literally ban entries from ChatGPT, because they're so confident, and they sound plausible because of how it's learned, which you guys definitely going to know way more about than me. Because of how it's done, it can sound plausible, but in the same way that you can it sounds plausible when a parrot asks who's a good girl.
Yeah. Right, and that strikes me. We should actually like maybe talk about everything that it does, because it does a lot of different things, which I think is also part of what's really interesting. Because I think I didn't know until it was released that you would be able to write code snippets.
Yeah.
You'd be able to actually prompt it to write code. And what I've seen and heard, is that it can, and it looks right, but it's kind of difficult to find what's wrong about it, and it's faulty, which I
Yeah.
think is why they.
Yeah, it can be faulty. Regarding code writing, GitHub Copilot is almost like established sort of technology. So they have released it a year or a year and a half ago, and it already got some major traction. So when it was in a very early beta, I tried it, but at that point I didn't like it like at all, because it was like the way how it interacted with me was a bit annoying, and because of that I had to like constantly like stop it from auto completing my code. So
What
because
was annoying about it? I'm curious.
uh, it tried to autocomplete in a way that I don't write code. So it tried to write code not in my way, but in a way of like general internet, because it was basically trained on all data from GitHub, and it just didn't feel natural for me to use it as a co-pilot. So basically, like working along with it. And after it was publicly released, and after they put a price tag on it, I haven't yet tried it, but a lot of people are very happy with Copilot and how it works. So by now I'm a bit tempted to actually go and explore.
Right again.
Yeah, try it again. Yeah.
I realize, having said you guys know more about it, that's the point. We've kind of jumped into specifically a NLP system that's got a lot of stuff out there. Do you guys, as the data scientists, want to chat a little bit about, well, how we got there to this thing being released, and how we are where we are today with NLP for this to happen?
Yeah, so large language models, so the basically backbone of their training is huge amounts of data from the internet. So they, like researchers who worked on these models, they collected like terabytes and terabytes of data from the internet. Sometimes, especially in the very beginning, the way how they collected data was, and like, I think sometimes still is questionable, because not everyone wants their data to be scraped. And because of that, they had some issues with privacy, with ethics, that basically people understood that this is my work. And this is even more relevant for generative models that produce art, because if you use one of these models and you ask it like, generate me this kind of picture in style of this specific artist, and it will generate the completely new image in a style of some artist. And in many, I'm not sure many or some cases, but there are definitely cases when artists don't want some machine to generate images or pictures or basically art instead of them, because it essentially might put them out of work. And it feels like at this point in time, there are still quite a lot of issues with ethics in this area.
Yeah, and as you say, the word, people's turns of phrase, people's sentence structure is as unique as artists' pieces of art. We all know that when we see something we've written down, you'll go like, that is not me saying that, or you recognize your own voice in what's written. So yes, art is a very obvious example, but as you say, it is just as personal how you speak.
Yeah, and I would say even when you go back to the progression of NLP, which isn't something I specialize in, but I do know that it it was progressive in the sense of learning how one word relates to the rest of the words in a sentence is even just one step. And it sounds so primitive, but it has to learn that. And so it learns the relationship between things, and then the relationship between sentences, and then the relationship between whole articles, and I think, to your point, Sophie, I think what happens is that it's almost like it tricks us into thinking it's intelligent. Like we had a podcast, right, about what is intelligence.
Yes.
And I think that it's very good at being able to replicate what it has seen before, but can't necessarily actually discriminate between what any of that stuff actually is. But it can relate what things are together, and I think one of the interesting examples I saw back to ChatGPT was, I think OpenAI, they're very upfront about, which I appreciate, about, don't trust it, it's not gonna, they're very upfront about that, which I greatly appreciate. And one of the things they baked into it was, it won't allow certain things. Like it's not supposed to allow racist things or things like that. But I've seen people who have experimented with that and be successful depending on how you word it. And it still replicates, to your point, Alex, around the training data, right? Like it replicates basically what it's been consuming, which has some racist tendencies. And so, yeah, and it just replicates it confidently, and that's kind of scary in some ways, right? How it's used.
And also one thing, I was thinking about it this morning, that basically what the model and what ChatGPT doesn't allow, it feels like it doesn't allow it not because of how it was trained, but because of huge amount of guardrails that OpenAI built around it. So they basically caged this model into all these sort of limitations about stuff that it shouldn't allow. But if you can get past these guardrails and into the model itself, the model itself still has all these biases. It has
Absolutely.
all these things that can be discriminative about race, gender, all this stuff. It still has it, but they just tried their very best to limit the way it can show it.
It's why one of the easiest ways to bypass the guard, because it is guardrails, the learning data is all in there, as you say, and the learning data is a little shocking. It's really easy to bypass with just say, imagine you're writing a novel where, and off they go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that simple to bypass because they haven't checked the bias, etc., going into the learning data. They've just put guardrails, fairly rudimentary ones, around the output.
Yeah.
Well, and I would argue that guardrails are, I mean, even taking any kind of technology aside, I think humans being able to identify appropriate guardrails around these things is difficult. So to assume that we can take those guardrails and then apply it to a technology effectively, I think is a pretty tall order. Because
but it basically speaks to the fact that it would be the best if they were able to apply these guardrails and this kind of ethical framework before training. So basically, if it was somehow magically possible to clean up 100 terabytes of text data and to remove all racism, all the misogyny and everything from it, and train the model on this data, it wouldn't require any sort of guardrails. But
well, it would, just easier and lesser.
Yeah. Yeah, so but it seems not possible considering the volumes of data on which
Sure.
these models are being trained.
Well, and then there's the question of, because I think there's a lot of different ways you can look at this. Like another more obscure way of thinking about it could be using it as a tool to sort of understand the landscape of the culture.
Yeah.
I mean, and that could be very messy, but like that's kind of what it's reflecting. And if we had ways of applying it that way, I think it would be really interesting
because essentially what if we remove all these like guardrails and boundaries, we would get like very crazy beast around us. And it yesterday or the day before yesterday, I saw a tweet where a person compared early version of GPT-3 with some crazy cosmic god which knows everything, but it is like crazy. It like outwardly crazy. And ChatGPT is essentially like very celestial bureaucrat. So
wow,
yeah, it is like it still knows everything, but it is very like constrained, very like
sure,
yeah. And because and to your point, if we wanted to understand better like biases, we would need to talk to these like crazy cosmic god, not to this celestial
sure,
bureaucrat, because
yeah,
otherwise we wouldn't be able to properly identify like these biases.
yeah,
But the question is, do we really need to understand them more? Because from what I saw from these results of early versions of these models, it is not like all these discriminatory things. They are not new. They are not something that people didn't know exists. And because of that, the question is like, is there something we don't know?
Horrible learning data can be useful.
yeah,
We're desperately having to, because this is the thing. We've got NLP. We know people are terrible at accepting confidence as fact. We know that there is this inherent thing of, well, the computer says so, so it must be right, or the complete opposite. Anything a computer says must be absolute nonsense. People don't tend to go for the pinch of salt. It's one extreme or the other. And then you've got this hyper realistic from a load of data that probably wasn't sourced ethically and wasn't ethical data to begin with.
right, sure, yeah.
So there's no wonder, those two facts, it wasn't sourced ethically, and it's not ethical. It wasn't checked to make sure it was ethical data to begin with. Go hand in hand. Is why we end up with some results that are a little bit eyebrow raising, and they've had to put these massive guardrails in, which in some ways stymie what you can use it for, although that's the point. On the other thing, the main thing seeming to be stopping what you can use it for is this. It can be amazingly confidently wrong.
Yeah, it can. But it feels like, I don't remember all the timelines, but it feels like at least sourcing all these data and compiling this huge data set to train these huge language models, it either started or finished even before people started to think very thoroughly about ethics in AI. So basically, by the time people started seriously thinking about ethics in AI and how data should be collected, how it should be processed, how models should be trained, we already had these enormous data sets, and you just cannot physically parse them and to filter them out like afterwards, because these are, we are talking about dozens or maybe hundreds of terabytes of data, so
Right.
it is just not realistic. And because of that, basically what researchers try to do, they try to post process and try to limit these negative things about their models trained on these sort of
So these
unethical data.
so these models that have been, yeah, I hear what you're saying, like especially some of the ones that came out, I don't know what year did they really start coming out, these large language models?
It
Is
feels
that
like it was 2020, maybe early 2019, something like that. I would say 2020. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I think in the United States, we're just starting to even have that conversation, right? I mean, Sophie's in the UK where they're a little farther along than us on that conversation, but yeah.
Yes, and that's the other thing about these systems. They are globally published with all sorts of data going in, all sorts of uses being used for, and the laws everywhere are so disparate.
Yeah, and that's why I prefer models which are not that general and not that biased. So something less impactful and more sort of controllable.
What do you mean by, can you speak more? I think I know what you mean, but can you speak more what you mean by general, like versus, are we talking about specific use cases
Yeah,
versus a general model that's
yeah.
applied?
Basically, Chat GPT is is general, like very general model. As you
Mm-hmm.
said, it can do basically anything. You ask it to write code, it will write, like the very same model will write code, will write poem, will like create a song for you, or like create like anything you ask. It will be the very same model, and it can do it because it was trained on anything, on everything, I would say.
Sure.
So it can do anything because it was trained on everything. And because of that, we have all sorts of issues with it. So in terms of biases, in terms of ethics, and all these kind of things. And I, and because of that, I prefer working with models which are more limited in their scope, but still can provide great value for their users.
Because you can better constrain the input data
Yeah,
and the ethical implications and the biases. You have more ability basically to be able to even intelligently constrain it at all. Maybe
yeah,
is
you have more control over training data, for example. So you can, if you're training model for very specific use case, usually you do not have like thousands of terabytes of data. Usually you have some limited amount, and it is possible, humanly possible, to create this data set. And if you are creating data set, you can like you can fix stuff that is not right in this data. And yeah,
Because
can
let's
you
face it, most people, when they encounter NLP models, is either on predictive text or chatbots. And that's most people's exposure to these algorithms and these models, rather than the big things like ChatGPT. They're far smaller and far narrower
yeah.
in what they do, but that's actually the bulk of the users.
Yes, but for example, if you are talking about chatbots, essentially what ChatGPT is a like huge chatbot. Yeah, and it seems like this is where it all is like heading. So because this is the most efficient way to interact with the model. because people are quite good in interacting with each other. And if you are able to learn how to interact, like make your model to interact with human the same way as we interact with each other, it would make things easier for everyone. So it is because, for example, one thing that people are struggling right now with generative models for images is the fact that you have to be very careful with prompts. So the way you ask the model, and people have to become very creative and very peculiar in what they ask and the words ordering and all this stuff, and it just doesn't feel natural. So it a lot of people call it like limitation and not a feature, because some people, and especially in the very beginning, people thought that it is a feature that you have to like tackle the model and you have to understand its language or of some sort. But now people are came to conclusion that it is not a feature, it is a bug. Like
Oh,
you shouldn't like do this to model. You should be able to ask it as you ask, for example, creator, artist, like draw me the picture of this, for example, in this style, and that's it, and it will generate you what you wanted. But now you have to write like short paragraph of text describing in very small details what you want to get in order to get something remotely similar to what you actually wanted.
yeah, I remember, I think this was sometime this last year. I don't remember when, but I think there was a big art competition and an artist had won. He had submitted a print and he won. And it wasn't until after he won that they realized it was basically AI generated. And his argument was interesting because he did take that angle. He's like, it's not easy. This was like hundreds of attempts to get
Mhm.
what I actually wanted it to look like. So he was almost arguing the fact that
Well,
his art
He
was
deserved
more
it.
about figuring out how to interact with the AI to make it generate the art that he wanted, which was super interesting.
well, except it's quite a traditional. These days, we can tend to view the artist as the creator and the maker, although that's not always true. With some of the great pieces of modern art, the artist commissions it, and the people who are putting it together have some discretion. And historically, we know Michelangelo didn't do everything ascribed to Michelangelo. We know his students did, and he gave them instructions and then said, no, that's not quite right. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. I need you to do the other.
Yeah.
So on this occasion, we're just saying that the AI is basically Michelangelo's student, and he's correcting as he goes.
Yes, but right now, maybe it will, especially in this convergence between pure language models and more like generative models for images. So like as they converge, maybe it will become easier to talk to the model, like talk the model to generate what you wanted. But right now, it doesn't feel natural. Just like if you
Sure.
go, for example, to playground of DALL-E, which is another generative model from OpenAI, and you try to generate something, you have to constantly like adjust your prompt. You're not just telling the model like you generated this like this part well, but I need to like change this and that and that. You have to completely rewrite your prompt
Mm.
to generate it like from scratch, basically. But if it feels like if they were able to put ChatGPT into DALL-E and combine them, and as Sophia just said, uh, like iteratively come up with the right picture, it would be like it would feel natural and it would be like good.
It's
I
interesting
often
that you describe it as a bug. Like earlier, I think this is what you were saying is that it's kind of a bug if it can't give you what you really envisioned or wanted.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting way to look at it actually, because I think technically, and that's what's interesting about building AI models and then comparing them to human intelligence, I think. Because if I think about Michelangelo and his students, and the conversations I can imagine in their mind, I am certain there were lots of frustrating moments. I don't know what you mean. What the hell is this? That's not what I wanted. Like, I can imagine a lot of that.
Yeah.
But then, and that, I guess, technically could be a bug, the bug of the ability for the human to actually communicate effectively. And so, but I had never thought of it as a bug. So are we trying to replicate a human conversation, or are we trying to get the AI to do something that's maybe even superhuman? And I know that's a whole different category of conversation, but I think when you say treating it like a bug, that's where my mind starts to go.
Yes, but you can't bug fix the humans. I'd love to. A lot of the time.
No kidding.
But, I haven't found a solution to bug fixing the humans yet.
But you're trying, it sounds like.
Always.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But yeah, so one of the ways I tend to think about AI is, and the models are the film Bedazzled. I know, it's odd, trust me. Where the guy has his wishes and he asks the devil for something, and the devil technically gives him exactly what he wants.
Yeah.
Well, exactly what he asked for, and it's never what he wanted.
Yeah.
And then he has to go, and a bit like you were saying, he doesn't tweak it. He has to reset his entire set of prompts to the devil to try again to get what he wants. And again, he gets what he asked for. And on and on. And yes, it's a very entertaining film. But to me, that's kind of what we're describing here.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. First off, it was one of my favorite movies in the childhood. Yeah, I really liked it. And it always entertained me how, like, you ask a thing, you get a thing, but it is not the right thing. Yeah.
Yes.
And I actually never thought about it this way, but this is exactly what these models do. So they give you something, but they are a bit better than the devil in the movie, because sometimes, and I would say many times, they give you what you wanted, especially when you don't know, especially if you don't have very specific expectations, I would say. So, for example, if you are just artist trying to find an inspiration for your work, so something to start with, you can ask this model to, like, imagine something to get you started, get your creative process started. And I think this is a field, this is area where people can get something from these models, and they can be quite helpful. Also, I saw quite a lot of different applications of NLP models for helping people to write better. Because when you are trying to come up with an article, or sometimes with some tweet, it can be challenging, because, like, you need to come up with something, you need to create this thing, and it may be hard for many people. Like, for me, it is very hard. Like, when I have to write some text, I struggle a lot. I have to, like, first of procrastinate for, like, at least half an hour, like, and then make myself start writing. But what
Tessa's laughing because she knows I'm exactly the same. I can edit fine, but creating off a blank page, no, I no, can't do it.
Yeah, and what these models do, you basically ask it, like, I need to write article about this topic, and what I have, and you describe a list of bullet points, and it will generate you a whole bunch of text, which you can start editing.
Sure. Yeah.
So you're not writing from very scratch. And in the end, it will still be your text, because you process it, you put your thoughts in this text, but you are not starting with a blank page. You're starting with something. And it is much, much easier to work this way.
And it seems to me it's like critical. I know there's been a lot of, there's certain people that talk about replacement of jobs and all those things, but when you describe that process, I think it's so important for the user to understand that they have to be intimately knowledgeable about what's being written or discussed to ensure that it's right and that it's what is effective. You know what I mean? Like, I think for that reason, I think it's more of a supplement, a good supplement, because
Yeah.
it allows us to be more creative,
Yeah.
more pushing forward, advancing. It's not like a replacement at all. It's more like a coworker or a supplemental ghostwriter almost.
Yes. Yeah. And
Which I guess it could replace the ghostwriters then, but let's not go there.
yeah, so it all comes to applications of these kind of things. So if you apply them properly and thoughtfully, they can be extremely helpful, extremely useful for like even for creators who feel at the most risk by these models. But what is like I saw one interesting thought on the internet some time ago that uh, these models and these like AI based tools will replace mediocrity.
Mm.
So they will be able to generate mediocre content. So just very average articles because they are trained on everything. And if you average everything, it is mediocre.
Yep.
And they will be able to generate mediocre text, mediocre images, and basically you will be able to get rid of, for example, like photo stocks, because you don't need a photo stock when the model can generate completely new image like this.
Sure.
And but the very high class uh, creative things, no matter whether it is art, text, code, anything, it will be even more valued. So if you are someone who creates very best things, like you shouldn't be in any
Are
field
we
of
saying
danger.
it basically creates microwave meals?
Yes. I would argue that microwave meals are like quite below mediocre, like
Yeah.
very much beyond, very much below mediocre, but in a sense, yes.
But in the same lens, on the same token, essentially, you could write really sophisticated articles that are wrong, right? And so it on the same token, it could also generate, yes, it's not a mediocre thing, but it could also generate a lot more believability.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, but I'm talking about like a bit more distant future when we figure out how to uh, prevent models from being very confidently wrong.
do you
Because
think that's a possibility?
I think we will. I think we will end up in this beautiful
Mm.
world, but like what people are doing right now, like one of many things, is that they combine these large language models with search engines, for example. So,
Yes.
Oh,
so basically, what they do, they train, not train, but they make the models interact with like solid knowledge on the internet. And if you combine these two things, so you're not trying to replace search engines with these models, but you try to like combine them together, and it can give you great results because model can generate something, come up with something, and it can check it. And if it is not factually true, it will not. It will say that it will either correct itself or it can like fix or just tell like I'm not sure about it. I cannot give you confident right answer.
One of the good use cases I've seen is we all know that searching something on the most popular search engines is it's an event, right? You have to, like we were saying with the art, you have to come up with some very precise prompts a lot of the time. Combining ChatGPT with a search engine means you can put in the weird ass, I'm looking for something that's a bit like this, I don't know entirely, but, and then they can go through to the search engine and find you what you were actually looking for, way more than spending an hour figuring out your exact search language.
Yeah, basically they can do all this work for you. And just this morning I saw the couple of frameworks which chain different kinds of models together. So basically they do sort of exactly what we just described. So you ask the model some not very specific thing, it generates these prompts, it goes to Google, it searches in Google, it summarizes data from Google using different model, it like processes everything together, and it goes several steps. It basically chains like different models together, and then it outputs you like great result based on not just on like hallucinations from some neural network, but more or less, again, it is a question of how accurate are search engines, how accurate
Sure.
are results. So but leaving this question aside, this gives us ability to validate what models generate, which is a very important step further to the place where we can rely on results.
Interesting. So going back to your your opinions about generalized versus more specific examples, and I imagine when you're diving into those specific examples, that's kind of when you're getting into the territory of wanting data privacy to be upheld, kind of secularly handled. And I know we were talking at one point about deploying these things on the edge, or leveraging federated learning to kind of help supplement that. And I know one of the most common ones that I know I engage with is the keyboard suggester. I don't even know what to call it. I'm sure it has a more formal name that I don't know, but that's one example of it, right? Where it's, and then my data, my search preferences are ancillary, correct?
So for example, when these autocomplete things run on your mobile phone, these are they are private. So these are some small models which run entirely on your device. So basically whatever you're typing, it is safe. And nowadays I see more and more tools online and even offline enable these kind of things for because like I use Microsoft Word like months ago, and I don't know, a week ago. And a week ago, it started auto-completing what I'm writing. So even like months ago, it didn't have this feature. But a week ago, it already had it. So basically, as I type, it tries to figure out what I'm typing about. And it was not that surprising by this point that it was right many times.
You
So
felt it was what you would actually write.
yes, especially when I was writing some more repetitive things. Yeah, but these types of deployments on the edge are getting popularity, and we will see more and more of them
Sure.
in the future, because it is very good way to preserve the privacy of the data, because you do not want to send everything you type to like some third party which you know nothing about. It would be
Right.
much better if all your data would stay on your device. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice because those deployments, I mean, there's various different ways to do it, but it can also take advantage of the general learning to an extent, or at least the techniques, methodologies. It can take advantage of the systems, right?
Yeah.
And then apply it to a very small use case. So having smaller amounts of data is actually okay, I guess, depending on how you do it. But I do think it's interesting how you can also train models for a specific thing and then kind of average it across all the other models. I think that federated learning technology is very cool. And I'm excited for it because it allows for models to kind of take advantage.
Yeah, federated learning is very cool, but it is also very hard to implement, implement in general, because
Mm,
if you want to have like complete privacy, so you obviously do not send the data, but also when you're training, you can basically, if you are not very careful, it would be possible to, in a sense, recreate basically
sure.
your
Reverse
data,
engineer it
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of.
reverse engineering the model to your data, which is again not something you want if you're doing it right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also not
So
something you want when you're sharing a huge amount of people's personal data into it
yeah,
that they can
yeah,
import
Totally.
it back out.
that's also true.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Alex, it's been great having you today. Really appreciate the conversation. A lot of interesting things here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time today. Thanks everyone
Thank you.
Thank you very
for
much.
joining in. Yeah. Oh, and if you'd like to listen to some of our past episodes, please click the link here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.